Thank you very much, Nuno. And thanks for the upgrade. I actually worked on the lunar orbiter project. We helped get that started, and the water we found, or the indications we found that were later proved, we believe, to be water, were on the moon. Um, but it's all important wherever we can get it. So today I'm going to talk about what I call the Space Declaration. And it's the declaration of the rights and responsibilities of humanity in the universe. Some of you may have seen recently, or in the fall, that there was an interesting dust up in the media when Elon Musk's SpaceX, while filling out some of the documentation for the Starlink, uh, pointed out that at some point they would be following not the laws of Earth, but the laws of space or their laws on Mars. In this article in the Independent, called Elon Musk's SpaceX Will Make Its Own Laws on Mars, I was surprised to actually see a document that I had designed over a few years show up as their reference when they talked about the idea that they would be sort of following some of the basic ideas in the declaration that you're about to see. So let's talk about this. As we move into the frontier, a lot of what we're going to be dealing with is gravity and radiation and all of these other types of things. But one of the most important things we're going to have to deal with is people themselves, people, their governments, and the rights and responsibilities that come with our journeying out onto the frontier. Now, I believe that when we look at these interactions between people, their governments, and the frontier, the core and central pillar that we have to look at are the human rights and responsibilities that we carry with us as we go. So, for example, I believe it is a human right to go anywhere, to build new homes, and to plant the seeds of new societies, to be whoever you want to be. I also believe that we have a purpose. And to me, this is at the very center of all the discussions of rights and responsibilities. I come from a position, I take the stand that we as human beings begin with a central purpose. And I call these the pillars of purpose. First is to protect and expand the domain of life. In other words, we are here not just to save this planet, not to just take care of this planet, but to carry her seeds to places now dead. Second is to preserve and advance human civilization. I like humanity. Yes, we're still evolving. Yes, we are basically apes with consciousness, apes with guns, apes with bombs, apes with computers. But we're getting better and better. And I believe that as we move out onto the frontier, we'll be creating new places, new options, new ways of being human. Not just that, but also new types of human beings. But I want to see our society grow. Where do we go to try out the next step after democracy, for example? And this is the fun one, to explore and experience the universe. So you see, exploration is just a part of this. When we explore, we are pushing beyond who we are. When we experience things, we are in a way doing that in the name of the universe. And I want to dive in on that for just a second. My belief is that the universe itself, without sentient beings, in other words, intelligent beings like ourselves, be they us or others on the other side of the universe, maybe having their own conference right now, we are the way that the universe knows of itself. So not only is our job to protect and expand life, not only is our job to grow and develop our civilization, our job is to explore and experience. everything there is to explore and experience in the universe. It sounds like a lot of fun to me. Everybody has their own version of what they want to do in space. And you might want to ask yourself, why do you want to go? What is it you want to do? What do you want to explore? What do you want to see? What do you want to touch? What do you want to feel? What part of the universe do you want to know more about? And by the way, if you're a kid, that could start right down the street. That could be you going to the other side of just this planet, or under the oceans to the highest mountain, or whatever it is you haven't done. Because that's where life begins. That's where joy begins. That's where love begins. When we begin to try new things and experience them and share that with those we care about. Until now, though, we have been locked in a cage. That is about to change. And as I said at the beginning, that cage is not gravity or radiation or danger. It is a cage of our own making. It is a psychology we hold that somehow we can't do that thing out there. Somehow we can't cross that line. But we can, and we're starting to realize it. Within 10 years, we're going to have fleets that are able to carry hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people into the new worlds of space. It's coming right now. In fact, I took a road trip recently down to South Texas, where I live, and was able to walk around in front of some of the tools that are being developed to do that. If you're a space geek like me, you know instantly what this is, the Starship. I think this was SN7, and I think they're up to 10 now. But they're going to keep building, they're going to keep growing, and they're going to keep doing this until they succeed. Because Elon wants to go to Mars. But you know what? While I'm happy about him wanting to go to Mars, and I'm happy about some people wanting to go to the moon, and I'm happy about Jeff Bezos wanting to build cities in space, I really don't care where does they want to go. As long as they can build a railroad that we can all take to go where we want to go. And that's the key. Because as we have more and more access to this frontier, and more minds are able to get there, incredible things are going to happen. So while you may know some of these famous people, and while you may see your, different spaceships and different types of technologies being applied to opening that frontier, what really counts is getting these minds out there. Now, let's go back a little bit to the beginning. As you remember, when you look at history, it was Sputnik, launched by the Soviet Union, that started, in truth, what they called at the time the space race. It scared the United States that this little thing was going up and around the planet, just going beep, beep, beep. I'm up here. I'm up here. You can't do anything about it. I'm up here. That race between two superpowers who were locked in a war at the time, and we can't forget about that. They were willing to blow each other up here on the Earth. Nuclear Armageddon was on the verge of happening at any moment. So what happened was the United Nations and other political and geopolitical bodies jumped in to try and slow this down, make it safe. And it was a good idea. It was important at the time. So they created a thing called the Outer Space Treaty. The Outer Space Treaty had two goals. One was to block the militarization of space. So they couldn't be shooting from space and doing all kinds of terrible military activities out there. Number two was to block the possibility that one or more of them might acquire the solar system and lock out all of what they used to call developing nations. Because these two superpowers had the capability to do so, and nobody else did. It worked. But here's an interesting point. The whole thing was based on nations, not people, national sovereignty, not individual rights. And that's something very important to keep in mind. But it did work. And today, every 90 minutes, you can look into the sky and you can see that amazing and wonderful space station where no matter what else happens, people from countries all around the world, people who may consider themselves to be enemies here on the ground, are working together. It's a wonderful thing. But it did create a cage. It did lock us into a way of thinking. So the question now is, will the United Nations and what I call EarthGov, other EarthGov bodies, be able to stop this new reality, or will they help us succeed? In fact, there are a lot of academics and a lot of people and a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of people in the United Nations and in governments around the world that are trying to see how they can get us out there. The challenge is many of them are trying to use the same old treaty, and they're trying to reinterpret things. I'll give you one example here. There's a word in there where it talks about use or utilization of space. Now, that can open up a lot of things. And a lot of people, like I said, in these government bodies are trying to recast that phraseology, to reapply it in a way that says, well, use can mean anything you want it to do. I applaud them for trying, but I think we're going to have to go back a couple of levels, higher a couple of levels, to principles, first principles, and then come back down to the level of treaties and agreements. Now, back in the day, the age of what is called exploration, and forgive me if I use terms and phraseology that may not be culturally appropriate. I am trying to make points, and I am frankly using the history of my nation and where I am. If it doesn't apply to yours, don't be offended. Just think of it in terms of, what does it mean to you? Where do you come from on this? How does this apply to you? I bet you can find examples in your own worlds. So for example, at the time, Spain and Portugal were moving out in the new world. They were both Catholic countries, and they went to the Pope, and he said, well, you can have this part and you can have this part. It was an interesting solution at the time. I don't think it held up very well. Another situation occurred when we started going to the Antarctic. And there was this idea that we want to keep it as pristine as possible, a good and important goal. And so the Antarctica Treaty was put in place. The challenge is that it stopped a lot of potential development. And frankly, because it is occurring within this bubble, this sealed sphere that we live in, I actually support that. But space is a different place. And as we go out into space, we need to be able to look at what it is we can do to enable the people who go out there to bring all of their creativity, all of their ideas, all of their beliefs, all of their possibilities, and do with them as they will, as they want, wherever they want to do it. Now, one interesting international document that isn't really talked a lot about in space or in space policy circles, that does actually give us the kinds of tools we need as we go out there, is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this is an exact clause quoted from that declaration. Everyone has the right to own property alone, as well as in association with others. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his or her property. Now think about that. That is a declaration that is a treaty that has been signed by the vast majority of countries on the planet that basically states everybody has the right to earn property alone or in association with others. This is a very important concept because, see, if you're going to go out there and you're going to put your life on the line, you're going to sink your entire fortune into what it is that you're doing out there, you should have the right to own what it is that you create, whether it's a space facility or a habitat on the moon or Mars. You should be able to own that. Here's some ancient and older ways of looking at it. This is Gaius of Rome, where he talks about occupation of areas that were not the property of anyone becoming the property of the first occupant. Now, up until now, clearly, only nations have been allowed to play in space. And as I said, most of those treaties that we've been looking at, or the United Nations treaties, are aimed at nations. But as new space has shown us, as the work that's going on around the world has shown us, more and more people are being able to participate in space. Part of that is through the reduction in the size of technology, as in the CubeSats that I show here, but also the costs are coming down. And again, as Elon is able to fly the Starship, it is quite possible that you could have a chance to go in your lifetime. I read an article just yesterday, by the way, where somebody pointed out that if one counts all of the different SpaceX flights going on right now, SpaceX is flying a rocket every 8 days. Now, project 10 years into the future where Starship has been proven safe to carry human beings, and a Starship carrying 100 plus people is flying into space every few days. At that point, we will really begin to see the democratization of space. People will be able to go. Now, going back to some of the earlier documents, the idea here, and again, this was a male-dominated society at the time, so forgive the male gender pronouns here, but any government which is wise should allow people to harvest and keep the profits from whatever it is they do. That is a very, very core and important principle. In the United States, and this is one that I like, and forgive the fine print, but what happened in the United States was very, very interesting. The Homestead Act kicked in right around the time of the Civil War, and it really got into gear shortly thereafter. But what happened was it enabled people to go out into the West of North America and begin to grow their farms and to be able to own a few acres of land, just a few, not the whole thing, just a few at a time, as a reward for them going out there. And what it did was it helped actually create equality in the United States at the time. And again, I want to be parenthetical and say, yes, I understand there is a subtext. It's not even a subtext. It's a major, major, major and important idea that there was a battle with the indigenous people here. And I understand and acknowledge that. But I'm using this example with you, hopefully understanding that as we go out there, we're not going to have indigenous people, at least in the solar system. I do address them in what I'm going to talk about in a minute. But for the near term, we're just talking about the solar system. And so it's basically dead rock. So I want you to think about that in terms of applying this Homestead Act into space. Now, we are starting to see some very enlightened policies. There's different laws that have been passed. I've worked on a couple. A lot of other people I know have worked on a lot of others. But they're getting more and more focused in on the idea that if you do the work, if you mine the asteroid or the ice on the moon, you should be enabled to keep your profits, to be able to trade them in a free and democratic enterprise system. And again, I go back to the Declaration of Human Rights and say that that is a core and founding document. So speaking of core and founding documents, I spent a little bit of time, well, quite a bit of time studying all of these other documents over time and tried to come up with something that I thought maybe encapsulated that into a clear and basic set of principles. I call this the Declaration of the Rights and Responsibilities of Humanity in the Universe, which is a great bureaucratic name, of course, but it's too long, so I just call it the Space Declaration for now. Now, I'm going to read this entire document to you. It's very short. There's going to be a lot of words on this slide. But don't worry, we're going to come back and we're going to break it down bit by bit and go through it. The Space Declaration says, "It is the inalienable right of all human beings to go any place in the universe, to do anything they choose to do, to use any resources they may find, to own the land or space on or within which they live, and to establish homes, enterprises, and communities that are free to be governed by the inhabitants and the citizens therein in any manner they see fit, within the parameters set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so long as in so doing they do not harm or threaten the earth, its life, or people, harm nor interfere with any other human beings, their property, sacred or venerated places, or harm the ecosystems, property, sacred or venerated spaces of any other living creatures. I've tried to capture everything I could think of, both your more libertarian-leaning concepts and your more preservationist concepts, put them all together into something that works for everyone. So I'm going to go through this real quickly. It is the inalienable right of all human and sentient beings to go any place in the universe. To me, that goes without saying. We have the right to go anywhere that does not belong to or is the property of somebody else. Period. It is not a question to me. It is a right. We have the right to do anything we choose to do. Again, it is not a question to me. It is a right. The only time that those rights get abridged in any form, if you believe in democracy and the rights of people, is when I give the right to a government to moderate that in terms of creating a functioning society. So I could do anything I choose to do, but I've chosen to let the government tell me that I can't drive on the other side of the road down here. Why? Because it would be a little chaotic. So everything I give away, it doesn't come from government. It comes from me allowing them to moderate behaviors, mine and those I live with, so that we can all live well together. That's very important to understand at a very core level. I also believe it is the right of human beings to use any resources we find out there. Space and the universe, as far as we know, is nothing but dead rock and energy, dead materials and energy. That's it. There are no living things that we know of. As we learn of those, again, there are clauses in this declaration that will help us deal with that. But the assumption is, and from the part of the solar system that we've seen and understood, it is all dead rock and energy. Another important concept to underlie this for you to understand is that as we transform those, as we mine those, as we harvest those resources, we are helping a living system, i.e. human civilization, and maybe even more than that, in terms of creating places for humanity and the life of this earth to expand into. So this is a positive thing. But you need to understand, if you're thinking about the frontier of space, that you have to put on a different head, a different hat, as it were, than when we are looking at the earth. Because down here, in this fragile, delicate bubble of the mother world, the use of resources is a problem. The more we do it, the more we use, the more we plunder, rape, and pillage this earth, the more harm we create to our mother world. It is a different story once you leave. And some people have a really hard problem getting out there and understanding that in their mind. They're applying old rules to a new paradigm. And that's what this is all about. And as you go out there, you have the right to own the land or space on or within which you live. In other words, if you build a habitat, that's yours. If you put a dome on the moon or under the moon, that's yours. And that space within a reasonable distance, and this is where the lawyers will still get paid. This isn't as if we're going to go out there and the whole legal framework and legal battles are all going to fall apart. That's going to go wherever we go. Wherever you have two human beings, you need somebody to negotiate sometimes. So as we get out there, you will own the land within which you live, or the space within which you live, and the land on which you live. That doesn't mean one person can land on Mars and declare they own the whole place. It needs to be brought into reasonable. We leave that to the governments for now. And when you're out there doing that, you have the right to establish your home, your enterprise, and your community that are free to be governed as you see fit. As you see fit. As you and the people living with you, inside the habitat with you, those around you decide how you want to be governed. Yes, at first, as we get out there, we're going to be governed in the way of the people who put us out there. That is understandable. But I want to give you a quick thought experiment. Imagine that for the first time in human history since we were hunter-gatherers, by the way, hunter-gatherers were the perfect anarchists. They were the ones who could live in their little groups and make their own rules because they had the full means of production in hand. The trees, the plants, the living creatures that fed them and housed them were all within their control. So there was no coercion, there was no blackmailing, there was no ability of any government to say, well, we're going to hold this back from you, or we're not going to give you this. They were pure individual modules of their own governance. For the first time in human history since then, as we get into space, a few generations out, with the ability to harvest space resources, the unlimited energy that we have out there, the ability to apply AI, and the ability to manufacture everything we want from what we find out there, maybe it'll get as good as Star Trek, where you can order a cheeseburger, a bowl of spaghetti, and it goes, psh, there it is. But even before then, as we're able to build and utilize anything we want from the resources that we control, the element of blackmail, the element of coercion, wherein other governments can tell you, you can't do that, is going to diminish and diminish and diminish. And participation in this community of humanity will become ever more voluntary. I think that's a good thing. Some people may disagree. I would love to chat with them. And what's critical, and I think underlines this, is that we do so within the parameters set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because yes, you can do anything you want. You can govern any way you want. But there does need to be a bit of a line. We need to respect the rights of individuals. If you take a purist point of view and say, well, Rick, you've said you can govern any way you want, we should be able to go up there and set up a fascist government and execute every third person. No. No. You can't read it like that. I am a celebrant of the democratization of space. I believe in people. I believe in their good side. And I believe we should try, wherever possible, to make sure that at the very base, we're doing the good stuff. Now, there's a second clause in the Declaration that gets into the do nots. And again, we're human beings, so we need to put a few of these in here. So as I've said, they have the right to go out there and do all of these amazing and wonderful things, so long as in so doing they do not harm nor threaten the earth, its life, and people. This is very important. There is no right, I believe, to go out there and harm us down here. That could be by dropping debris, throwing your used space station down on the Earth, which I am very, very much against. Heaven forbid, shooting weapons from space. Anything like that. That is not a right. You also do not have the right to harm nor interfere with any other human or sentient being, their property, sacred or venerated places. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I'm throwing sentient in because I want to give a nod to E.T. I hope E.T.'s out there. Haven't seen him. Don't know where they are, but I hope they're coming. And I hope they join us and invite us into a community. But in the meantime, we want to acknowledge that possibility. The other point, though, is you cannot interfere with people. So, for example, if you're out there working on something, somebody can't block your radio signals. Somebody can't Shanghai or steal or take what it is you're shipping back to the earth. They can't do that. That is not a right. Because that their belief that they have the right to do anything does not cause your right to be who you are, own who you are, create the productive engage in the productive activities you're doing to be subsumed by them. Sacred and venerated places. This is important. This will get controversial somewhat early. There are people who hold this face of the moon, for example, as sacred. I kind of do myself. I do not want to see strip mines on this side of the moon. By the way, and this is a fine point to some, but it's a pragmatic point, I don't care about the other side. It's not sacred to me. It is not venerated to me. And there are other places that we may come across that are venerated, maybe to another sentient being. We come across some planet and this is sacred to them and we don't touch it. See, this is all about balancing your rights with common sense and reverence. And we do not harm the ecosystems, property, sacred or venerated spaces of any other living creatures. What I mean by the ecosystem is that part of wherever those creatures, those people, those living systems are that are unique to them and are a part of the survival of the place they live. So, Rick, you're going to go to Mars. What if we find life under the ice caps? Okay, let's take that one. So you're going to Mars, and we find that there are puddles of water under the polar ice caps, and there may be bacteria living there. The one thing we do know is there's a reason the bacteria are living under the ice in the water of the ice caps. It's because they can't live on the surface. So I would suggest, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a scholar, but I would suggest that that's the ecosystem, that we can't harm that part of Mars where they live and feeds into where these creatures live. But the rest of the planet should be wide open. Now, I'm using broad and sweeping statements here, and there's holes that can be poked in all kinds of little ways here and there. But again, we're talking about first principles, top-level principles as to how we should act and interact with the rest of the solar system. And of course, then there's the signature of that we, the people of Earth, who are going into space, because it's those who go into space that matter here. We don't have to have everybody on Earth agreeing, but if you're going into space, if you're building a space company that's going to do things in space, if you plan on putting people out there, plan on housing people, I would urge you to adopt this declaration. And of course, the closer here is that we that the space beyond the mother world, and she is the mother world, be considered free by all, for all, and to all. It's time for us to break out of the cage. It's time for us to celebrate this amazing and beautiful mother world that we've come from, but to also understand that we have a purpose. Our purpose is to move from here to out there. Thank you.